Welcome back, Nuggets. This mother clucker's got some documents. Yes, not just thoughts, full on court case documents. So let's ruffle some feathers and get into it. And if you'd like to support my baby chick of a channel, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hype this video. Check out my other videos while you're here, especially that last update where I was theorizing about why Eugenia has this ban, because boy, was I on to something without even knowing it. So, in my last video, do you remember me saying that I am done with these updates unless something tangible pops up? Well, something tangible popped up. My last video, I spent 27 minutes theorizing about why Eugenia has been banned from TikTok for 95 days at the time. At the time of recording right now, we're sitting at 111 days. I dug through all of the terms of service, analyzed all of the community guidelines, and basically tried to figure out what kind of violation could cause this weird frozen state where she isn't monetized and it's not deleted, which doesn't make a lot of sense. And I was wrong about my theories. Well, I mean, kind of. Because thanks to one of my nuggets who gave me a little tip off, thank you so much, Jez. Big shout out to you. I was able to obtain federal court documents that nobody else seems to be talking about yet. And it turns out Eugenia's ban has nothing to do with anything that she did on a live or in her TikTok shop, but it has everything to do with this. And I know you might be saying, come on, Vera, this is really old news. This happened back in May. We're not talking about this at all. But this is the catalyst for everything that has been going down. It has everything to do with a lawsuit where Eugenia has accidentally found herself Exhibit A. Now, before we get into it, I just want to do a quick apology about my voice. If I sound weird, I wanted to get this out super quick to you guys. And I am filming in the morning, which is something that I really hate to do because I think my voice sounds really weird in the morning, and I have hay fever because it's spring here. And yes, but this is important, my nuggets, and I wanted to get this out to you as fast as possible. So this is my closest available recording moment. So please bear with me. I apologize if I sound a bit weird. Okay, so for anyone who hasn't been following along, like, none of you have been following along. I mean, come on. But just for argument's sake, Eugenia was effectively banned from TikTok starting on the 29th of June 2025. And I say effectively banned because here's where it gets weird. Her account still exists. You can still find it, but there are no monetization buttons, no subscription options, just nothing. But she is able to seemingly log in and still speak to Jeffrey in his lives, but there's no content going up on her TikTok page. So in my last video, I went deep into TikTok's terms of service, trying to figure out what was going on, and I found some interesting things. First, TikTok is deliberately vague about ban durations. They don't tell you how long you're banned for. They don't tell you exactly how many strikes you get before you're out. Everything is intentionally unclear, which I theorized gives them maximum power to basically do whatever they want. Second, I found that TikTok has different types of restrictions. There are content violations, there are transaction policy violations, there are permanent bans, and what was happening to Eugenia looked like a transaction policy restriction where you lose access to some or all monetization features like sending gifts, receiving coins, all of that. Third, I discovered that strikes on your account expire after 90 days, and a lot of people were expecting Eugenia to come back at that 90-day mark, but at 111 days at time of recording, we are well past that, and still nothing. So in my last video, I theorized a few possibilities. Maybe she's going through a lengthy appeal process, or even potentially a law proceeding to try and get her account unlocked. Maybe TikTok had lifted restrictions, but she needed to accept some terms or do something to reactivate it, but perhaps wasn't in a state to be able to do that. Or maybe her account was in like some kind of weird review limbo while like all of this was going on. I also pointed out something that really bothered me. Her account is in this frozen state, but if you go on TikTok and only follow Eugenia like I do, TikTok will show you so much in regards to this pro-condition situation, if you get what I'm saying, because I totally can't say the words because YouTube doesn't like them. Like actively showing off their condition, bragging about it, people cheering on body goal comments and all of that. But Eugenia sitting on a pink couch getting excited about Jeffree Star, that's not okay. Is that not a bit weird that these other accounts are not being targeted? And in fact, I actually opened up my TikTok to check something for this video, and the very first video it showed me was pro-condition content. The inconsistency is glaring. And I theorized that TikTok was probably aware of the issue and trying to get ahead of it, like trying to get all of that kind of content off their platform because they just don't want anything related to do with this condition on there, like at all. And I was right, but I had no idea how right I was or why they were doing it. Why target Eugenia more than the other accounts? But before we get into that, let me tell you about my experience with TikTok's quote unquote enforcement, because this happened right after the last video I put up, and it wasn't like enough to do a whole video on, but I thought it was interesting and maybe some of you would like to see this. So speaking about TikTok's inconsistency, I post all of my Eugenia content on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, basically, all of those platforms. TikTok is the only platform that consistently removes my videos. The only one. Not once have I had a community guideline breach on Instagram or YouTube. The worst on YouTube that I've gotten is just the video gets age restricted. So this post was from my video about the AI, and it had those censored videos in it that I basically blurred, but it was her in fairly compromised positions and in a state of undress to a point. And I got this warning on my account. They cited sexual exploitation, which, I mean, they were censored. They were heavily censored. You couldn't see anything. And it got an official warning on that post. So when I appealed it, I thought this process was really interesting. TikTok told me that it could take up to 80 days to review. So that's not even any number that we've actually heard of before, right? And in the end, they fully rejected it anyway. And so, as I said, even right now, as I'm recording this, I opened TikTok and immediately shown pro-condition content from people who are clearly very unwell. And the algorithm recommended that content to me that TikTok claims to be fighting against, but me analyzing that kind of content, that gets removed. Right? It's not about protecting users, it's about controlling the narrative. It's evident that TikTok doesn't actually want the content gone. They want the criticism of how they handle the content gone. So a few days ago, as I mentioned, one of my lovely nuggets sent me this. It's an article that mentioned that TikTok was accused of withholding documents on an influencer with a certain condition, and then it goes on to mention in the text that I can see. Annoyingly, Law 360, it is a very, very legitimate site, but this article, you have to have a login and use an email with a paid domain on it, which I don't have. I just have like a Gmail. So I couldn't see the rest of this article, but it got me interested. It got me very interested. Is there something larger going on? And this absolutely made my investigative chicken brain absolutely explode. And now I know why. Because TikTok's being sued over this. So after a whole lot of digging, and this was really difficult to find because the US really doesn't want international people looking at their court documents, so I had to go on this crazy route. I was finally able to find court documents that have been unsealed from August 13th, and nobody's talking about this. Like, absolutely nobody. I cannot believe that this has not been on our radar because it's so blindingly obvious. So I'll put the case number up on the screen, and I'll also put everything in the description for links for anybody who wants to read this themselves. So this court case is titled Social Media Adolescent Personal Injury Products Liability Litigation, and this is a big lawsuit that's been going on for some time. So these are all snips from a law firm called Motley Rice, and they are basically part of this litigation team. They're not the only one, but they had a really good information basis on their website. So I'll link the two that I found below as well if you want to read them. So, case overview, they say states, school districts, and individuals are filing social media, medical health lawsuits alleging platforms like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, and YouTube are intensively interesting and harmful to youth. Sorry, I need to censor certain words, but they're up on the screen so you can read them. Children and teens are especially vulnerable to the alleged defects of social media. If your child has suffered mental health issues, including addiction from social media use, you may be eligible to file a social media harm lawsuit. People who suffered mental health issues as minors may also be eligible. And interestingly, in this month of this year, a total number of pending actions in the adolescent social media litigation increased to 2,053, up from 1,961 in September's report. So there are a lot of people getting on board. And these sites all have like links where you can kind of apply for this. But you can see this is a big thing. They go on to say that this lawsuit is a multi-district litigation case centralized in the United States District Court of the Northern District of California. And it involves a whole lot of the major social media platforms. So you can see that TikTok is not the only one, but interestingly, TikTok seems to be the squeaky wheel, especially in what we're going to be discussing regarding Eugenia today. So what the plaintiffs are after in this case. Individual plaintiffs request compensation for the physical and mental harm caused by social media's defective products. Individual plaintiffs may also claim compensation for their emotional distress, non-economic. The social media lawsuit payout amount per person will vary depending on the unique facts of the case and the severity of the mental or medical condition. School districts and local governments request compensation for the economic damages of social media within their communities. Examples of the damages sought by school districts and governments include costs of repairing physical damage, increased costs associated with monitoring social media, increased need for school resources like psychologists and counselors, and educating teachers and staff about the harm that can be caused by these. Basically, states want to protect the public from further harm due to social media companies' alleged actions. So they are looking for financial compensation, but they're also looking for change. Some of the issues that they're taking with social media is like age verification, time tracking on the apps, use of addictive features, and photo filters. But because we're going to be speaking a lot about TikTok today, I'll just run through what they've highlighted about TikTok specifically. Each social media platform had their own section. So they don't like that the autoplay feature can't be disabled. So it kind of creates that constant cyclic nature of viewing the content. There's a continuous scroll. There's limited buttons, which makes the interface really basic and easy to use. It creates a flow state. And I've said it before, TikTok are experts at gamification. They have nailed it. It is scary how good it is. I didn't know this, but apparently some smartphones, TikTok is actually able to cover the clock so you can't see how long you've been using it. Stories are time sensitive, which creates like a sense of urgency behind the viewing. And the TikTok Now feature sends push notifications. So it basically calls you back to the app. And these are the issues that they're having with it. Now, look, this might be a hot take, my nuggets. I do acknowledge that all of these things are true. And I do think that these things are damaging to the youth of the world as a greater whole. I do think very strongly that we need to be really careful about asking companies to parent our children, or worse, asking governments to parent our children. You do not want the government stepping in to parent your children. And I think all of this can be largely mitigated if we're just really paying attention to what the youths around us are doing with their phones or spending their time doing. I think the buck is being passed, and I think it's dangerous to be getting the government districts involved in this. I really do. So they go on to say that some of the social media health effects can include the following: ADHD, the condition that we're discussing, anxiety, body dysmorphia, also the condition we're discussing, depression, low self-esteem, sleep problems, other things that I can't say. Young users may also experience cyberbullying, and that's so true. And I grew up as a teen with the internet that was completely unguarded, and absolutely that's a thing that happens, and that can cause all manner of issues. Okay, so if you notice, this is called an MDL, not a class action lawsuit. Basically, it's a massive federal lawsuit where hundreds, or in this case, thousands of individual cases about the same issue get combined together and handled by one court, compared to a class action where it's one person moving forward through the whole thing. In this case, it's families suing social media companies, including TikTok, over allegations that these platforms are designed to be intensively interesting and cause harm to children and teens. The plaintiffs, that's the people that are doing the suing, are arguing that these companies knew their platforms were causing harm and did it anyway because engagement equals money. So essentially exploiting the youth to create as much money as they possibly can. That sounds right, doesn't it? Which is why parenting is so critical here. So you might be thinking, okay, stop talking about all the legal cluckery, and where does Eugenia come in? So this document that I found is specifically about a discovery dispute over Eugenia. And let me explain what that means. So in a lawsuit, there's a process called discovery where both sides have to hand over relevant documents and information. The plaintiffs can request documents from TikTok, and TikTok has to produce them if they are relevant to the case. Well, the plaintiffs want more documents about Eugenia, and that's what this document is outlining. And TikTok is fighting so unbelievably hard to not hand over these documents, and that's what this original article was about. And the timeline of when this fight happened lines up perfectly, coincidentally, allegedly, maybe, but probably, with Eugenia's ban. Okay, so let me walk you through this timeline, because when you see all of this laid out in order, it becomes really obvious what's going on. So on the 23rd of May, the infamous day, the incident that kind of sparked all of this, Eugenia collapses during a TikTok live stream. Now, this was actually reported in the news. MSN ran an article about it with the headline, Eugenia Cooney fans worried as TikToker goes AWOL after ending stream not feeling good. May 24th, Eugenia posts a TikTok video from TikTok's New York City office. She was there visiting headquarters. Obviously, this would have been filmed before, but was probably scheduled to go out. And coincidentally, it was the day after that Mother's Day incident. So on May 29th, the plaintiffs in this lawsuit send a letter to TikTok demanding supplementary discovery about Eugenia. They basically want documents that talk about TikTok's relationship with Eugenia, because clearly they are forefronting her, communications between TikTok and Eugenia, internal TikTok communications about Eugenia, user complaints about Eugenia's content and health, which, I mean, come on, they would be in the thousands, right? Any communications with organizations like the National Alliance for Conditions about Eugenia, and why TikTok blocked searches for her profile and then unblocked them. And I actually remember this happening. Do you, my nuggets? They had her completely age restricted and hidden for a time, and then it was released. And so the articles say, quote, plaintiffs promptly asked TikTok to supplement its discovery responses limited to specific documents concerning Ms. Cooney. Defendants claim plaintiffs lack good cause or diligence. Not so. Plaintiffs requested these materials on May 29, the same day plaintiffs learned of Ms. Cooney's collapse. So throughout June and July, TikTok refuses. They go back and forth with multiple letters and meetings. TikTok says, no, this is untimely. Discovery closed in April. You're too late. And I quote, TikTok did not respond for over a month. Plaintiffs then sent another letter on July 8, waiting until July 21st for a response. Plaintiffs requested an H2 the same day and renewed the request on July 23rd. On June the 29th, Eugenia gets mysteriously demonetized from TikTok. And this is where we all started to get lost because we couldn't identify or point to any specific event that could have caused this. On July 30th, a final meet and confer between lawyers happens. They can't reach an agreement. Quote, on July 30, 2025, lead trial counsel for the parties involved in the dispute attend a final conferral. August 13th, this particular document, this joint letter brief, gets filed with the court, laying out both sides' arguments about whether the judge should force TikTok to hand over more Eugenia documents. So do you see this? Do you see what's happening here? Eugenia had her incident on, I know they're calling it a collapse. I wouldn't define it as a collapse, but let's just roll with it. This is the language they're using. So Eugenia collapsed on TikTok's platform. The plaintiffs immediately went, oh yeah, yes, we need discovery about this. TikTok said no. And right in the middle of that legal fight, Eugenia gets banned. Seriously. That's what happened. And I think it's really difficult to not see how these things could possibly be linked. And I think out of all of the theories that are floating around, this answers the most questions, and I'm going to get into it. So let's talk about what the plaintiffs are actually saying in this court document, because it's damning. The plaintiffs argue that Eugenia is directly relevant to their case because she is evidence that TikTok knew that their platform was causing harm and did nothing, or worse, actively promoted harmful content. Quote, TikTok brought her into its inner circle, redacted, at brand events, including TikTok's live programming and TikTok's live battles entitled Road to Superstar. Let me repeat that. TikTok, the company, invited Eugenia to corporate events, featured creator events, Road to Superstar competitions, and importantly, there is a massive reduction right there before at branded events. What is there, my nuggets? I would love to see what is under that black bar, because I think there is something heckin' juicy right there. Quote, to date, TikTok has produced over 300 documents referencing Ms. Cooney, its relationship with her, user complaints about her, and related harm to users with conditions. So 300 documents. That means TikTok has hundreds of internal documents about Eugenia, user complaints about her, and discussions about her conditions harm to youth. Quote, TikTok's relationship with Ms. Cooney was also a central topic during redacted disposition in February 2025. So before the collapse, there was a deposition where TikTok employees were questioned about Eugenia. So this has been an issue in the lawsuit for a while. And it's also why TikTok is turning around saying, no, you knew about her. Now it's past April, past the discovery period. You're too late. You can't have more. The plaintiffs cite a Harvard expert, Dr. S. Bryn Austin, who they describe as a leading expert in the public health epidemiology of conditions, particularly among adolescents and socially marginalized populations. They're basically building a case that says TikTok knew, they had complaints, they had experts telling them, they had internal discussions, and not only did nothing, but they platformed her. Plaintiffs request TikTok supplement the following information: communications, analysis, and investigations that went into the decision to block users from searching for Ms. Cooney's profile and instead showing a message directing users to the National Alliance for Conditions, and communications, analysis, and investigations that went into the decision to reverse the block on users searching for Ms. Cooney's profile. And this one's really interesting to me. The plaintiffs want documents about TikTok's decision to block the searches for Eugenia's profile. So at some point, if you search for Eugenia on TikTok, you got redirected to a conditions resource. And then TikTok reversed that and let people find her again. The plaintiffs want to know why, when, who made that decision, and what were the internal discussions, because that shows TikTok knew her content was harmful. They acknowledged it by blocking the searches, and then they unacknowledged it by unblocking her. That's weird, right? And Through this document, there are huge redacted sections. We can't see what TikTok's trust and safety team knew or didn't know because it's actually blacked out. But the fact that it exists and it is redacted tells us that there was something there. Now, to be fair, let's talk about what TikTok is arguing because they're fighting this hard. TikTok says the plaintiffs are too late. Discovery in this case closed April 4th, 2025. The plaintiffs didn't ask for Eugenia-specific documents until May 29th, almost 2 months after the deadline. TikTok argues, quote, the court should enforce the fact that discovery deadline and deny plaintiffs' untimely request for new discovery. Nearly 2 months after the close of fact discovery, plaintiffs made an entirely new and untimely discovery demand. They're basically arguing that the plaintiffs knew about Eugenia long before the discovery closed, which we knew. They questioned witnesses about her in depositions back in February. If they wanted more documents about her, they should have asked back then, and they absolutely should have. But potentially the catalyst of the Mother's Day incident gave them a little bit more weight because prior to that, she was just another person on the platform doing what they do. They continue to argue the collapse on May 23rd and her office visit don't justify reopening discovery because those events happened after the relevant time period for the case in April. Basically, TikTok is saying the lawsuit is about what happened up to April. So stuff that happened in May doesn't count, right? And quote, plaintiffs concede they already received detailed documents and deposition discovery regarding Ms. Cooney and have likely been aware of her presence on the TikTok platform and others since the initiation of this litigation. TikTok already produced over 300 documents about Eugenia in response to earlier requests. They argue that they've complied with discovery and the plaintiffs are just trying to get more stuff they're not entitled to. Which is, I mean, kind of fair. We have discovery cutoffs for a reason, but are these circumstances different? And here's where TikTok gets a little gross, honestly. They accuse the plaintiffs of exploiting Eugenia. Can you, I mean, hello, pot, I am kettle. Quote, plaintiffs in poor taste have needlessly included selective images of Ms. Cooney without context to claim relevance, thereby exploiting someone they maintain has a, quote, obvious condition. They're basically saying, how dare you use images of this sick woman to make your case? While simultaneously arguing that her illness is irrelevant to whether their platform causes harm. It's like you pick a side, pick a lane, TikTok. You can't do both of those. TikTok goes on to argue that Eugenia is 31 years old, not a minor. So she's not relevant to a case about harm to children and teens, which, I mean, that's just so not the point. I don't feel like you need to be a lawyer to see through that. But quote, then during this letter briefing, plaintiffs demanded for the first time that TikTok defendants again produce redacted deposition employee and further claim they're not entitled to depose Ms. Cooney, a non-party to this litigation. Moreover, plaintiffs have not even identified a single plaintiff who has allegedly been injured by viewing Ms. Cooney's content. I do find that interesting and hard to believe because I myself know somebody, although they weren't a minor at the time, they were a young woman, but they do leave room for that in the litigation too if they've grown up with it. So I would be getting on that if the plaintiffs haven't done that yet. That's very interesting. Surely that would be very easy to find. But the plaintiffs counter this by saying children and teens see her content, right? Yeah, they're influenced by it. User complaints exist about harm her content causes to minors. She's relevant because of her impact on these young users, not her age, of course. So that's TikTok's defense, basically, in a nutshell. You're too late. You already got documents. You can't have more. This is outside the relevant time period. Stop exploiting her. And she's not a minor, so it doesn't matter. What? But here's the thing, my nuggets. If TikTok's arguments were really about procedure and timing and rules, then why was Eugenia banned right in the middle of this legal battle. So let's go back to that timeline. May 29th, plaintiffs demand Eugenia's documents. June, July, TikTok's fighting it. June 29th, Eugenia gets the ban. Now, in my last video, I theorized that Eugenia's account was in some sort of weird frozen state. Monetization gone, but the account's still there. And I was wondering if maybe she was going through an appeal process or needed to do something to reactivate it. Because none of this makes sense based on usual timing for how social media works. By now, it should have ended the appeal process, and either she's reinstated or the account's deleted, and neither of those have happened. But what if there's no appeal? What if this is a legal strategy? Think about this from TikTok's legal team perspective. You're being sued for promoting harmful content to minors. One of your most visible examples of potentially harmful content is Eugenia. The plaintiffs are specifically asking for documents about her. They want to know about your relationship with her, your internal discussions about her, and user complaints about her. Then she has the Mother's Day incident on your platform during a live stream. That's a PR nightmare and a legal liability bomb. And now the plaintiffs want even more documents about what happened after that incident, about her visit to your office, about everything. So what do? You distance yourself. You ban her from the platform, not because of terms and service violations, but because every single day she's on your platform creating content, you're generating more and more discoverable evidence. Every live stream is another potential incident. Every user complaint is another document you'll have to produce. Every internal discussion about her is more evidence that you knew and didn't act. Now, you might be thinking, why not just delete her account? Problem solved, right? Because TikTok is in a lawsuit. They might be under what's called a litigation hold, a legal duty to preserve evidence. If they deleted Eugenia's account right now, that would basically be seen as destruction of evidence. And that's not just a lawsuit problem. That can actually be criminal. Courts really don't like it when you destroy evidence. They can tell the jury to assume the deleted evidence proved that you were guilty. They can fine you massive amounts of money, and they can even rule against you automatically based on that action. Companies have literally been destroyed for shredding documents during lawsuits. So TikTok can't delete the account without potentially making things worse for them. But they also can't leave it active either, because every day she's on the platform generating content, there's more discoverable evidence, more live streams, more user complaints, and more internal discussions. So they did the only thing they could. They froze it. Not deleted, not active, frozen. It's the legal equivalent of putting evidence in a sealed box. They might be preserving it for the lawsuit, but they're not actively using it to generate new liability. And that, nuggets, is why her account has been in this weird limbo state for 111 days. It's not a ban. It's not an appeal process. It's a legal holding pattern. And so you call it a ban and let people assume it's community guidelines, and we've all been running around speculating. But here's how I, without a doubt in my mind, without actually seeing all of the data, know this is a lawsuit and not about terms of service. In my last video, I mentioned that someone, whether it's Eugenia or someone with access to her accounts, has been uploading videos to Lemon8. Now, for those of you who don't know, Lemon8 is owned by ByteDance, the same parent company that owns TikTok. And by the way, Lemon8 literally uses your TikTok login. Same account, same infrastructure. If they wanted to ban her for community guidelines violations, they could flip one switch and she'd be gone from both platforms, which is a question that I have had in some of my update videos, why that hasn't happened. But they haven't done that because this isn't about community guidelines. It's essentially TikTok's sister app, same company, same terms of service, same community guidelines, same login. So if Eugenia's ban from TikTok really was about harmful content violating community guidelines, then why is she still allowed on Lemon8? If ByteDance, the parent company, determined that Eugenia's content violates their policies and is harmful, they would ban her across all of their platforms. She's banned from TikTok. She's not banned from Lemonade. That tells you this isn't about content violations. This is about TikTok-specific legal liability. If you remember the list of companies that are part of this lawsuit, Lemonade is not mentioned. ByteDance is, but not Lemonade. So Lemonade doesn't have any of that baggage. Everything's been accumulated on TikTok. She really only started posting on Lemonade after this ban was put in place. So there's absolutely no evidence trail there. There are probably a few viewer complaints, but none that are going to this lawsuit because they haven't been requested. She's not part of a federal lawsuit about Lemonade. So they let her stay on Lemonade because banning her there would make it obvious that this is legal strategy, not content moderation. They're trying to have it both ways, basically. They're trying to distance themselves from her on TikTok, where the liability is, but keep her monetized on Lemonade so they can claim it's not a company-wide ban. But it's not clever. It's highly transparent. And I think, in my opinion, it proves that the ban is about the lawsuit, not community guidelines. So what does this all mean? So for Eugenia, does she even know she's part of a federal class action lawsuit? Does she know that TikTok has 300 plus documents about her? Does she know that the plaintiffs want to depose her? Because yes, my nuggets, she does. In this court document, the plaintiffs say that they want to depose Eugenia Cooney. They want to question her under oath about her relationship with TikTok, about the events they invited her to, about user complaints, about everything. They also want to redepose a TikTok employee whose deposition was apparently left open back in February. I have no doubt that they're probably trying to fight this from happening. I could not possibly imagine Deb wanting this to happen. So for TikTok, this document shows that they are fighting hard to avoid producing more evidence about Eugenia. They're arguing procedure, timing, relevance, anything basically to avoid handing over these documents, because those documents probably show exactly what the plaintiffs are alleging, that TikTok knew her content was harmful, had complaints about it, discussed it internally, and not only did nothing, but actively promoted her, and so therefore making bank off her, right? For the lawsuit, this is huge. If the courts grant the plaintiff's motion and forces TikTok to produce more documents, we might actually get to see internal TikTok communications about Eugenia, the decision-making process about blocking and unblocking her, user complaints about harm to minors that I can only imagine. I know so many people report her. What happened after the collapse and communications about her office visit. That could be incredibly damaging to TikTok's defense. For Eugenia's ban, I don't think Eugenia is going through a normal appeal process. I don't think this is about strikes expiring after 90 days. I don't think she needs to accept new terms. And in my last video, I mentioned that Jeffree Star said in August that she'd be back in a month. That came and went. Was he making it up? Was he protecting his investment? Did someone tell him and it was wrong? We don't know. But it makes me wonder if maybe they were going through some kind of process in August that they thought would be resolved or hope would be resolved quickly, and it wasn't. I basically think that TikTok's legal team has put a hold on her account while this discovery dispute plays out. And depending on how the judge rules, I think one of these three things will happen. And bear in mind, I'm not a lawyer, okay? But this seems logical. 1, the judge denies the plaintiff's motion. TikTok doesn't have to produce more documents. At that point, TikTok might quietly unban Eugenia because the immediate legal threat has passed. Option 2, the judge grants the motion. TikTok has to produce all of those documents, and maybe even Eugenia gets deposed. And in that case, TikTok might keep her banned indefinitely to minimize ongoing liability, or they might even push for a permanent ban to fully distance themselves. Option 3, they settle. The parties reach some kind of agreement, and as part of that settlement, there might be terms about what happens to creators like Eugenia. But something that I do think is very, very likely, I think TikTok is going to keep her in this frozen state as long as legally possible. They won't delete her because that's destruction of evidence, and they won't restore her because that creates new liability. They'll just keep her frozen, call it a ban, and hope people stop asking questions. So this case isn't about Eugenia specifically. It's not a personal attack on her. Please let me be really clear about that. This is so much bigger than her. This is about whether social media platforms can be held liable for harm caused by their algorithm and design choices. The plaintiffs are arguing that TikTok and Meta and Snap and YouTube designed their platforms to be addictive because of course they clucking did. Of course they want to make money to maximize engagement at any cost, and that they knew this was harming kids and did it anyway because engagement equals money. Eugenia is just one example, a piece of evidence in a much larger case. Because she's so visibly unwell, you can't look at her and not see that something is obviously wrong. And I almost wonder if they were to prove that she wasn't suffering from this condition, but perhaps it was a different medical condition. I think that would be really important to actually keeping Eugenia away from the deposition if they could prove that, because then you can't just be deplatforming people based on a medical condition, right? That's ableist. That's not good. But the fact that this hasn't been done yet, I think really solidifies for us that it is the condition that we think it is. Because I know some people have thought about that, wondered about that for some time. She had her Mother's Day incident on their platform. This is a nightmare scenario for TikTok. Visible, documented harm happening in real time. And so all of these things make Eugenia specifically just that really powerful example for the plaintiffs, and compared to, say, anybody else that's on the platform. And that's why I think this is so targeted, or it seems so targeted from TikTok to Eugenia compared to the other people on the platform, just because there's so much going on and swirling around her. Because if the plaintiffs can show that TikTok knew Eugenia's content was harmful, had complaints about it, discussed it internally, and still chose to platform and promote her, that's evidence of knowing. That's evidence of willful harm. That's evidence of severe negligence. And I really want to be clear about something. I'm not saying Eugenia is responsible for this. She's a creator making content, and she's a person struggling with a serious illness. And I know that I've gone around and around with this debate. I could debate both sides of this really well, whether she should be deplatformed or not, because I don't think it's right to deplatform somebody for a mental condition. But at the same time, unlike many conditions, this one can actually hurt other people. And that's pretty rare when you think about all of the different things that can go on in the brain or body. It's rare that it will impact somebody else. So that is worth factoring in. I don't know. I don't have an answer. I'm happy to say I don't have an answer, because I don't think that we always need to be black and white about these things. It's tricky. I do believe fundamentally in people's right to live the way they want to live their life if they're a consenting adult. So the question is whether TikTok, the platform, has a responsibility to protect vulnerable users, especially minors, from content that might harm them. And you know my views on parenting already. I think that that's where it should start and stop. I really do. I think the rest of it is highly risky to be asking companies and government to get involved. But the evidence suggests that TikTok knew there was a problem and couldn't figure out how to balance protect users with maximize engagement. And when forced to choose, they chose engagement / money until they got sued. And then they chose legal strategy. So you might be wondering, what's the end game here? These companies have billions. Can't they just ignore a US court ruling? Because TikTok is a Chinese-based, or the parent company ByteDance is a Chinese-based company. Kind of. Short answer, yeah, maybe. They could technically. But think about this. Even though ByteDance is Chinese, TikTok operates in the US through TikTok Inc. as a US entity with US assets, right? So the offices are in the US. Courts can freeze their accounts, seize their property, and ultimately force them out of the US market entirely if they don't comply. So it is in their interest to follow the rulings. And here's the thing, TikTok is already facing potential ban threats for national security reasons. This lawsuit adds a whole new angle. They're not just a foreign company with data concerns, they're actively harming American children. And that is a political nightmare. So my prediction, I'm going to be a prediction chicken. Here we go. I think TikTok settles, probably for a very large amount of money. I think they'll implement some policy changes, agree to oversight. It's a big company. We didn't know what we were doing. Things slip through the cracks, and try to move on. Because the alternative, going to trial, losing, and settling a legal precedent that opens them up to thousands of more lawsuits, is existentially threatening. But the real question is, will these settlements actually change anything? Or will platforms just pay the fine, tweak a few policies for show, which, I mean, come on, they've already been doing, and keep prioritizing engagement over safety? Time will tell. Tell me what you think, my nuggets. How do you think this is going to end? So where do we go from here? Legally, we're all just waiting for the judge, Magistrate Judge Peter H. Kang, to rule on this discovery dispute. He'll decide whether TikTok has to produce more documents about Eugenia or whether the plaintiff's request is untimely. I have no idea when that ruling will come. Could be weeks, could be months, but I'll be watching the court docket, and if there is an update, you will hear about it from me. For Eugenia, I genuinely don't know what's going on with her. The Disney sighting showed her she's still around, but she looks increasingly unwell. And if she's not in a state to manage her accounts or deal with the appeals or any of that, then yeah, the frozen state makes sense for reasons that have nothing to do with TikTok's legal strategy. It's possible both things are true. TikTok froze her account for legal reasons, and she's not in a state to do anything about it, even if they unfroze it. For the lawsuit, this case is massive. There are thousands of plaintiffs, multiple defendant companies, and it's going to take years to resolve. These cases are not fast, but cases like this can change how platforms operate. For the other creators, if you're someone who makes content about sensitive topics, mental health, certain conditions, body image, whatever, you might want to pay attention to this case, because if platforms start getting held liable for the harm caused by content they promote, they're going to start being a lot more aggressive about moderation. And that's a double-edged sword, right? Because on the one hand, maybe fewer vulnerable kids see harmful content, but on the other hand, legitimate creators talking about recovery, awareness, and education, they might get caught in the crossfire. So this is very complicated. The irony is that most people have forgotten about the Mother's Day incident. It was just another concerning Eugenia moment in a long history of concerning Eugenia moments. But in a federal courtroom, that incident is evidence. It's a timestamp. It's proof of harm occurring on TikTok's platform after TikTok had already been warned, after they already had complaints, after they already platformed her at corporate events. That one incident gave the plaintiffs ammunition to demand more discovery, and TikTok panicked. So I'll keep digging, I'll keep watching the dockets. When there's an update, I'll let you know. And if you want to support this channel and this kind of investigative deep dive content, YouTube memberships and Patreon are available. And speaking of that, thank you so much to all of my cluckers. I appreciate each and every one of you. I do have another members only video planned, and we'll be recording it very shortly. Thank you so much for watching. If you're still here, I appreciate you so much. But that is all the clucks I have left to give. Stay golden, my little nuggets, and I'll catch you next time.
Hey! I'm gonna go watch another video. Let's go!